If you just really put some intentionality behind the spending that you do and the saving that you're doing and put together a very simple plan, you can leverage the power of compounding in your benefit. And over a period of not too long, you can put together a portfolio that is big enough to carry you through the years of retirement and then even much earlier than that.
Hello, I am Cody Ellingham, and this is the Transformation of Value podcast. In this episode, I talk with Trey Sellers, VP of Enterprise Sales at Unchained, who are global leaders in collaborative custody solutions for Bitcoin, with their Unchained Vault product that uses a multi-sig arrangement so that there is never a single point of failure for your Bitcoin. We discuss some of Trey's writing about the FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early, and how a low time preference strategy of saving and investing can help you achieve financial independence earlier in life. We also discuss some of the fundamental metrics for tracking Bitcoin adoption. Finally, Trey shares Unchained Connections, a new way to help friends and family to custody their own Bitcoin and get it off of exchanges. If you would like to support my work and growing this show, please consider tipping some Bitcoin to the show's wallet. Otherwise, pass this episode on to a friend who you think may enjoy it. If you have any questions or feedback, please reach out. My emails are always open, hello@thetransformationofvalue.com. Otherwise, on to the show. Sweet, man. Thanks for making the time. I know it's...
Absolutely.
Are you in Atlanta, Trey?
I'm in Atlanta, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just spent a month in Croatia, actually.
Oh, really? How was that?
With the family. Great. We saw the whole country.
Yeah.
And really enjoyed Korčula. I think that was our favorite part of it. We were there for about a week, and it had everything that we liked about the rest of the country all in one place. So it had the old town, really good food, beautiful views of the water, which the water's incredible there, and mountains in the background and the yachts and all that.
Yeah.
And then, really nice beaches that were not too far away.
Yeah.
And then it's also kind of not too far away from 15, 20, 25, I don't know how many wineries. And so we would go out and do some wine tastings and that kind of thing, which is a lot of fun. So all of our favorite things in one spot.
Yeah. Do you have a personal connection to Croatia, or was it just a holiday, or?
No, we did a month-long trip in Portugal last year. And when we were deciding to go to Portugal, we were deciding between Portugal and Croatia. And we decided on Portugal for last year. So we're like, okay, well, if we're going to do this again, let's go to Croatia. Yeah. So that's really what it is. It was more about finding a place that would be amenable to my work schedule.
Yeah.
Because I did work while I was over there, probably about 60% of the time or so, US hours. And so it was, nice to have good connectivity and have it be the time zone difference not too bad for me to work kind of in the afternoon and into the night. And then, everybody speaks English there, so it's easy to get around. Yeah. So kind of that combination.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, I'm probably a bit similar like that. I find it actually a little bit hard to stop working sometimes. And what the best remedy I've found is when I do go on holiday with my wife or with friends, I think having just the ability to do a little bit of work means I don't feel like I'm just letting it all go, because I don't know. Do you know the feeling? It's sort of like I'd like to just keep in touch with what's going on, and especially something you're passionate about with your work. It's quite hard to sort of just turn it all off. It's like, well, what do I do now? And it leads to a bit of an existential crisis potentially if you just throw it all out. So
and I'm in a sales role, right? So I have clients
You've got to be available.
They're reaching out to me, asking questions. It's deals that have been in the works for a little while, and that's especially early on in a vacation. I find myself more plugged in, and toward the end of the week, after I haven't been drumming up new activity, because I've basically only been responding to activity that is coming from previous work that I've done, then it starts to slow down toward the end of the week.
Yeah. Well, that's really awesome, because it kind of leads into the first thing I wanted to talk to you about, which was the FIRE project. And I know you've done a bit of writing about this, financial independence, retire early, this concept of, working through a financial program that means you can, not work as much. You can retire earlier in life. And you've done a bit of writing about this. And I think I was just reading your article on your website just before and sort of understanding, given what has happened in the last few days, as you might be aware, with the Japanese stock market meltdown. And I don't know if I mentioned
I noticed something was going on.
Yeah, it's sort of popping off. And I don't know if I mentioned it to you, Trey, but I'm based in Japan, just south of Tokyo. So it's been quite kind of strange sort of seeing it all unfold. But FIRE movement, let's talk a little bit about that, because it is traditionally based on the stock market and kind of investment in that role. But, Bitcoin's in the picture now. So, yeah, what's your thoughts on FIRE?
Yeah, the FIRE movement is something that I found, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 years ago. I was in a traditional corporate type job, and it's not like I hated what I was doing, but I certainly wasn't, loving going into work every day and dealing with the commute and being, tied down to those hours and all of that. And I'd much rather be playing golf and exploring the world and doing all that, kind of like what we were talking about with Croatia. Yeah. And so some way or another, I happened upon some of the quote unquote influencers or thought leaders in the financial independence, retire early world. Mr. Money Mustache is one of those, Paula Pant, there are a few that are kind of focused on real estate and that kind of thing. And it piqued my interest in that it was something that I kind of started to intuitively understand that, oh yeah, if you just really put some intentionality behind the spending that you do and the saving that you're doing and put together a very simple plan, you can leverage the power of compounding in your benefit. And over a period of not too long, you can put together a portfolio that is big enough to carry you through the years of retirement, and then even much earlier than that, maybe. And so, the more and more I kind of dug into that topic, the more it started to make sense. And then I really dove quite heavily into that worldview. And, I've owned Bitcoin since 2014, but, until call it the last 6 years, not a significant amount of it, not a material amount. And so that wasn't really a part of my FIRE strategy at first because I didn't quite understand Bitcoin. And so I would, make my paycheck and be very intentional about my spending. And I tracked it in a spreadsheet. I still keep that spreadsheet actually and update that, almost every day. It's become part of how I approach my personal life and the habits that I've formed around money and my personal finances and our family's finances. And, it started working just like I expected it to, right? Any excess cash that was coming in beyond what I was spending was being immediately invested. And I should put that in quotes because I come to understand that, buying a stock market index, like what I was doing, VTI has been kind of my vehicle of choice because it's the broadest stock market index in the US. It covers basically the entire stock market. And you're really just pumping as much money into that as fast as you possibly can so you can get that compounding work going for you. And so, as my journey through Bitcoin and understanding it began to unfold, I started realizing that, well, actually what I'm doing with the stock market is not investing as much as it is just saving. And guess what? Bitcoin is the best savings vehicle on the planet. And so I should be saving primarily in Bitcoin instead of in the stock market. And so that's where this transition started to take place for me in my personal finances, where I really was not diverting any of that excess cash into stocks anymore in the stock index, but I was converting it into Bitcoin instead and building that savings nest egg there. And as we all know, Bitcoin has a way of compounding at a much higher rate than any other asset out there because it's strictly limited and because of the unique situation that we're in right now, which is that nobody understands it. Basically, nobody understands it across the world. And, nobody understands why it's valuable. Nobody understands exactly how scarce it is. Nobody really understands how to even get a hold of it, even if they wanted to. There's a learning curve involved there that I went through, that you went through, that everybody goes through. And but then, of course, once you start looking at that, you can't look back.
Yeah.
And so when I wrote this Bitcoin is fire friendly article, it was really to help the people who are fire practitioners, who are trying to follow the same plan, start to think about Bitcoin as a part of that plan. That doesn't mean that you're going to go necessarily all the way to 100% of your savings going in that direction, because it does take some time to build up that conviction. But it at least should be a part of your thought process, and you should at least be aware of the arguments in favor of it as part of a financial independence retire early plan, so that you can decide in a conscious way whether or not you want to incorporate it into your plan. So that was the aim of it, to try to spread a little bit of awareness of Bitcoin as the ultimate savings vehicle, and then also talk about some of the limitations and the downfalls of the stock market as well, which I think a lot of people have not really dug into. It's a very U.S. centric view because the U.S. has had the leading stock market in the world and the leading economy. Maybe that's changing, maybe it's not, but it does kind of exclude naturally a large portion of the world population that may not have access to any stock market at all, let alone the U.S. one. All right, sorry, I'll pause there.
No, that's great. Thank you. And I was going to say something I had noticed when I first came across the FIRE concept, when I was living back in New Zealand, it was from an American person. And there's this kind of challenge that, certainly from a New Zealand perspective, that housing is the only option, really. There's in recent years, there's been an opening up of the access to the US stock market through a lot of these kind of apps that are now available. But certainly in the last few years, or before that, you weren't able to even get exposure. So, and the New Zealand stock market's non-existent effectively. So it's sort of not really, there wasn't a vehicle for that. And instead, it was housing, which also had this strange regulatory situation where there's no capital gains tax. And so it was like, yeah, of course, housing is the way to go, which leads to an interesting social outcome where housing is ridiculously expensive in New Zealand. And in the same vein, here in Asia, in Japan, you've got a different kind of conception of wealth building, and something kind of almost an opposite to the FIRE movement, perhaps you could say, this kind of YOLO, you only live once kind of movement, which exists quite a lot here in Japan. And in China, they even have a word for it, tanping, which is like lying flat, just working a minimum wage, just getting by day to day, because the ladder has been pulled up, whether it's housing or getting a job or any of these kind of late stage fiat kind of challenges. Basically, people are like, man, well, I'm just going to hang out with my friends and have a good time, which works maybe when you're young, but eventually it catches up to you. And it's sort of like, you talk about having a spreadsheet and being very onto it. It's sort of almost a real shame that in a lot of places people think they can't make it. There's no kind of hope, if you know what I mean. There's no vehicle for success. And I mean, Bitcoin's a lot more accessible than a lot of these things. But I mean, how would you couch, the kind of the golden vision of this FIRE project versus the reality of a lot of people that just haven't got the time to study it, they don't know about it? How do they get onto this concept?
I think there needs to be a balance between that YOLO mentality and the hardcore FIRE approach that I think a lot of people who discover this approach and start to see it work for them, they go like way overboard. I was kind of a victim of this mentality for a little while as well. It's like, okay, I really enjoy this afternoon coffee that cost me $3 a day, but man, I could be saving an extra $3 a day, and that could really add up and like save me like 10 minutes of working at the end of my life or something like that. Like I'm being hyperbolic to some degree, because it does have an impact. Where I was at my life, making a decent income, and being able to save a good amount, like that really wasn't moving the needle for me. But if you're just starting out, maybe that is something to consider. But you need to make sure that you are approaching life in a way that is going to maximize the long-term viability of what you're putting together and where you want to go, but then also making sure that you're enjoying the time that you're here because you're not guaranteed tomorrow, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and so if I had advice for young people who are just starting in their career, it is put together a plan that allows you to pay yourself first, make sure that you are taking this FIRE approach. Bitcoin should be incorporated into that. And if you really understand Bitcoin, it probably should be the primary mechanism that you're using to save. But then make sure that you're carving out that time to go experience the world before you get married and before you have kids and before, whatever other obligations start to creep into your life, that will otherwise kind of hold you into different patterns than what might want to choose when you're that young. Go after those things because there's a time and place for everything. And when you're 70 years old, this is part of the FIRE movement actually, right? Is that why put retirement off until you're 65 or 70 years old when you're too old to actually do anything of real substance from a physical standpoint or even maybe a mental standpoint? Maybe you don't even get to 65 or 70 because there's some type of accident that takes you off this planet, prematurely. And so you need to be mindful of the time that you have and really be grateful for it and work toward building a life that you want while also keeping that low time preference view that building a nest egg, saving for those retirement days, maybe saving for a house and the down payment that you need is really important there. And the other thing I think that feels like I understand the sentiment of, wow, housing is so expensive in the places that I want to live. And, the first rung of that ladder is like really high above me and I can't reach it, and these boomers are just taking up all the housing because they want their big house and they've had a beautiful life where they, bought their dream home for like, $40 and a pickle or something back in 1972. And they just got to enjoy all of the fruits of that fiat monetary debasement that, got pumped into housing, just like you're talking about. And like, I get that argument. I certainly am guilty of kind of playing into that sentiment. At the same time, like there has to be a thought toward sacrifice in the early years and making concessions to the fact that most people are starting from a place where you're not going to be able to just buy your dream home on the first house that you buy. And so maybe, that big house with the pool and whatever that you're seeing out there is inaccessible now, but that doesn't mean that you can't start at a stepping stone level and start, building equity in a house that you do want to buy. Or maybe buying is not the right way to go about it, right? Like look at renting and then invest that down payment, right? There's so many different ways to look at it. Yeah. But I think this feeling of dejectedness is a symptom of the fiat world and the way that things have been playing out. And I also reject the premise that people should look at the world and then feel helpless. Like you need to take control of your life and think about working within the system to put yourself on a path that will get you the things that you want to get.
Yeah, well, we're pulling on that thread a little bit more. So I actually live south of Tokyo in the ancient city of Kamakura, which is like temples and mountains and stuff. And I go into Tokyo, which is like a fiat city if I ever saw one myself. And yesterday
I've been to Tokyo, but it was, I don't know, 12 years ago or something.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably... I
loved it. It was great.
Yeah, I mean, it is profound. It's sort of an experience in itself, but certainly it's a lot of concrete and it's just such a huge place. And I went in to catch up with a friend who's, running a creative business, and it was almost a sort of a bit of an intervention. He's sort of working so hard, and he's got this other side project that I'm kind of trying to get him into bringing Bitcoin into that project to a degree. And I was sort of working through some of the sort of the mental barriers of like, well, why couldn't you do this thing that's, you're obviously enjoying this other side project a lot more than your main thing. And I was sort of working through it, and it was really weird. I don't know if you know that feeling, Trey, when you sort of look back and you think, okay, this is sort of how far we've come along the journey. And then there's still people who are, maybe earlier on that journey and, working through these questions of job security and sort of financial security and these kinds of things. And I could see this deep sense of sort of fear or unknown for the future, even though, he's not going to go broke just by, working on this side project for a little bit. And I wonder whether, I guess what I'm getting at, this kind of financial independence, retire early, as you say, you probably, by the time you're 65 years old, 70 years old, you can't really do too much. And so I've always thought about it more in terms of mini retirements, and certainly Bitcoin has enabled that. And sort of the nature of, I guess, the world where it's at today is like, you go, and I just did a month in Europe, and you've just done Croatia for a little while. And, you can sort of make these hybrid approaches to living a fulfilling life that goes out into the world and meets new people and opens yourself up to fate. And who knows what would happen? Who could you be sitting next to on the airplane who's going to change your life through one conversation? Who are you going to bump into? Which you don't necessarily get to do that if you're just, riding the train and commuting to work and doing the thing, right? And so I wonder whether couching new approaches to, I guess, living as in a broad sense to this, where Bitcoin kind of enables you to have freedom in different parts of your life, different times, allows you to do things and meet people who you wouldn't otherwise meet. I mean, how would you sort of contrast those two paradigms?
Well, I think you're right in that, Bitcoin does lend itself to, over a long time frame and working within the framework of your financial plan, the ability to amass more wealth than you otherwise would be able to. So that's one thing. It is certainly a global and globally accessible money. And so as the network continues to mature and more people adopt it, we'll be able to do more travel in a little more frictionless way, because you don't have to worry about currency conversions and all of this kind of thing. We were in Croatia, and they're using the euro over there, and we thought, man, we did it. We used all of our cash down to the euro, in the airport in Paris on our way back. And then we got home and we're like, oh man, we found this like €2, coin that we otherwise forgot about. Yeah. That's kind of annoying, right? It would have been better if everybody just accepted Bitcoin and we could just all, use all of that. But that's not the reality yet. We'll get there.
Yeah. Well, sorry, just I guess higher level than that, and I think this is maybe where I'm not so much of a numbers person. I mean, I keep a personal spreadsheet, but I don't look at it like that. I think of it more like, you'd be familiar with the wealth effect, right? Where someone who say owns a home, they feel wealthier even if it's sort of locked up, right? And in a way, Bitcoin's like that, but different. Where I feel so much more comfortable about the future, knowing that I've got this asset that isn't going to just melt away. It sort of changes your approach to life, and in a sense it takes away this huge dark cloud of like, well, what are we going to do in the future? And it, in a sense, unlocks your ability to do the work that you really need to do. And I think this is what I'm getting at, like, fire.
There's a framework there. There's a framework of thought.
Yeah.
And comparing that to the fire framework, that is one thing that I felt freed about. I think this is what you're getting at.
Yeah.
When I had a plan, it was like, okay, I know exactly what I'm going to be doing. I know exactly where I need to get to, because there's kind of a formula embedded in this approach. I'm tracking my expenses. I've got this goal that is calculated from the expenses that I'm doing on like a trailing 12-month perspective, which is 25 times those expenses. That's how big I need my portfolio to get. And you can even calculate, okay, well, what's your savings rate and how long is it going to take you to get there, given a bunch of other assumptions. And so it's like, you can free your mindset. You can put that part of the mental energy that you need to spend on a day-to-day basis, you can put that part on autopilot, basically, and not have to think about it, because you've got this track or this plan in place. And Bitcoin is like that as well, right? It's got that parallel where you can feel, when you develop the conviction for it, you can feel very confident in where things are going to be in 10 years, such that you can secure wealth in a money that you control, that can't be debased, that feeds into that financial plan that you want to have, and gives you that it frees you of the burden of having to think so hard about where your investments need to go.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You don't need to think about that anymore, right? You just save in money.
Well, and I think this is, obviously, people retire, they can, you can go and spend time with the family or do other leisure activities, but I still think there is a deep requirement for following some sort of passion or given task from wherever it may have come, and in sort of your callings, sort of what is it that you're doing here? And I think that's what I've been thinking about a lot is, I ride the train into Tokyo, and it's like I'm kind of LARPing as this kind of commuter, amongst all these people who are working. And I saw a guy, and he had his phone open with sort of, in the crammed Tokyo trains, and I could see the stock market tumbling sort of in the morning the other day. And it was like, okay, there's a whole framework here of, kind of, I don't know, late stage modernity or something where, the system is starting to unwind and people are just kind of continuing with the old sort of ways of being. And I'm a big fan of some of the writing around, say, like the sovereign individual, the digital state, these kinds of new paradigms for living. And I think, what does it mean to not have to think about that stuff and instead focus on your greatest possible task in life, which, sorry, it sounds a bit highfalutin, but like, is that the kind of the next renaissance that we see where people can suddenly work on these amazing projects, whatever they may be, architecture, businesses?
Yeah, I think Bitcoin is a tool to that end, the same way that the US stock market is a tool to a very similar end for the FIRE community or real estate or whatever, right? So, I don't know that I would put Bitcoin up on this like special pedestal. Like, it sounds like you're implying that it's Bitcoin, so it's a special tool for getting this, and you can't achieve this this goal of financial independence or freeing yourself to work on things that you love in any other way. I don't think that's true. It may be in some parts of the world, but I don't think that's true in most of the Western world and in the US, where I have my experience. I don't think it's true for you, right? You are pursuing the thing that you want to do because you're passionate about it, and you've decided, I'm going to go after this thing. But you could have done that if you were pursuing the traditional FIRE mentality there. It just might be a little bit slower because Bitcoin goes up so much faster.
I think, I mean, just sort of my final thought on that, though, was that I could have done it maybe with other ways, but there's something about Bitcoin, and maybe this is my ideology coming through, but it just feels different. It feels like, as I said before, I see a lot of this around me. People just, there's no hope. There's no sort of sense that there could be a way out of this. But with Bitcoin, and once you go through,
it feels like you found the key or a secret that nobody else knows about.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. So, I mean, for me, that's where it's at. And I'm curious, Trey, in terms of this FIRE project, I mean, you mentioned some books and authors and these kind of communities. Has there been an engagement with Bitcoin as a tool in the broader FIRE community that you're aware of?
I've seen a little bit of it. People are starting to come around a little bit. There's certainly the people on Twitter who come after Bitcoin with ridiculous things, and they're really just engagement farming and that kind of thing. There are some people who are genuinely starting to think about it, like, oh, maybe this thing is not going away, and maybe it's something that should be considered. I wouldn't say there's anybody out there that I'm aware of that is just, come over to the dark side, so to speak, or the orange side, in the way that you and I are. Yeah. But that's okay. It takes a little bit of time. Yeah. Mr. Money Mustache is kind of, one of the key personalities from way back in the day in terms of the FIRE movement. Back in 2018, wrote a blog post that just said Bitcoin is stupid, and it was after the bubble of 2017 was bursting, and it's falling and all that. Okay, fine, but it just went from $300 in 2015 to $20,000 in 2017. So it's not exactly that nobody finds value in this thing, and it was all the same FUD arguments that we've all heard. So nothing new there. Yeah. But it's very hard for anybody, to make a public acclamation like that, and then to come out publicly and refute that acclamation. It's much easier to just defend it
Yeah.
over the course of years or ignore it, completely.
Yeah.
And so that's what people, I think, tend to do.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, in the New Zealand context, there's certainly, as I mentioned, the stock market access has really increased. There's been a few apps that have come out over recent years, and there's been a few cases where people are basically gambling in these kind of sort of like Robinhood, but not Robinhood. These kinds of apps, right? Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because some of these figures have come out from this TradFi kind of perspective, and they look at Bitcoin and crypto, and they kind of criticize it, and they write about it, and they get quite a lot of attention. And it's interesting because it seems to me there's a couple of truths that you outline in your article about FIRE, about kind of the nature of money, the way life gets expensive, over time with inflation. It's saving money is not enough. You need to kind of invest it as well. There's this kind of there's truths that underpin the concept, and it seems like perhaps FIRE as a tactical project is quite achievable and people can follow the rule book, but there's kind of a higher level of understanding of the nature of money. And I think maybe what we're getting at is it's quite hard to look at that, strata from 10,000 feet and kind of understand what money is. It's easier to just follow the rule book and buy the index funds. So maybe there's a bit of sort of introspection there on the nature of money and kind of where we're at in history as well, perhaps.
Yeah, there's a momentum that you're following when you kind of opt into the FIRE movement, in that there's a history there, and that you don't need to necessarily understand why this approach works. You just need to know that it does work and then follow the program, as you're saying.
Yeah.
And it does work. At least it has, it has over the last 40, 50 years. Maybe we're in a different cycle of time over the next 10, 15 years where you really don't get any good real returns in the stock market relative to inflation being elevated and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That remains to be seen. I tend to think that it will continue to work, actually, in that, stocks are now very thoroughly entrenched in the lexicon of store of value assets, or the standard choice of store of value assets, much more than gold is, really, much more than a lot of different assets out there, other than maybe people's homes, which are extremely illiquid and hard to manage in an appropriate manner for, achieving what you want to achieve for FIRE. And then, bonds are just totally wrecked and will continue to be. I mean, I just cannot understand any kind of argument for owning a bond unless you're legally required to do so, for any like long amount of time. And even then, money market funds are paying 4.5% or whatever. So why would you own a bond if you could just own a money market fund? I don't get that, but I like to keep things simple. So,
buy Bitcoin.
for me is buy Bitcoin and self-custody it, and put a succession plan in place so that your family can get access to it if something happens to you, and then just stack as much as you can, as fast as you can, exactly how you're approaching a FIRE approach.
Yeah. That's awesome. I got one other thing I wanted to talk to you about, Trey, which is another piece you did on Bitcoin's fundamental metrics, which I thought was very interesting. Tell me a little bit about that, if you may, or I've got a few prompts here if you...
The fundamental metrics being, trying to recall, so are we talking about the tenets of Bitcoin?
We had like HODL waves, Lightning Network capacity, market cap, etc. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, got it.
Sorry, not to throw you out, but
no, that's okay. Bitcoin is hard to measure, actually, to see exactly how much the adoption is happening. Partially because it is primarily at this point in time a store value asset, and so hodling is using Bitcoin. And when you're just sitting on Bitcoin UTXOs for long periods of time, it's not moving, and so there's no like activity per se in that particular chunk of Bitcoin that you've got. And so it's very difficult to kind of measure the adoption rate of how that Bitcoin is being hodled, but it has a very real impact on the valuation, of Bitcoin and how people look at it. So some people have obviously looked at HODL waves to see how long has it been since particular chunks of Bitcoin have moved. I think that's really interesting and important and has historically been very important in gauging kind of where we are in the cycle and where in these periods of distribution or accumulation seem to be happening. But you're making guesses and assumptions there. When we talk about hash rate, I think that the energy infrastructure that's being built into and around Bitcoin is one of the biggest sources of its entrenchment over the long term, and one of the biggest tailwinds that we have going for us. The more that Bitcoin mining gets entrenched into the energy networks of the world, gets adopted by energy systems, companies, grids, off-grid stuff, the more people rely on Bitcoin mining being a part of the infrastructure there, the harder it is to peel back. And the more easily it is for the governments of the world and the other corporations of the world to adopt it and bring it in, because it's just kind of part of the communication protocol of this fundamental layer of how we work within the world, which is our energy systems. And so looking at hash rate and how much hash rate is coming onto the network is a really important gauge of how much adoption we're getting on that very important energy front. Yeah. But the Lightning Network, has been morphing over the last few years. And I think when I was talking about those metrics, I was very much thinking about kind of a retail or peer-to-peer, small payment, everyday type payment, similar to the way that you would use a credit card type of function for the Lightning Network. And that has been very difficult to build for, actually, because of the inherent limitations of the way that Lightning works and channel management and liquidity issues, capital issues around that. And so we've started to see much more of a gravitation toward larger hubs, and Lightning being you can almost think about it as like the corporate payment system, the rails of the major arteries of moving Bitcoin around the world on these larger hubs. And then the endpoints need to be met with that last mile needs to be met with other solutions, it seems like. And some of those might be eCash. Some of those might just be credit, right? Like there's still a demand and a need for credit in a short-term basis where I can swipe with my credit card and then pay my credit card off with sats at the end of the month. You know what I mean? So all of that remains to be seen. But if you are looking at the amount of sats within Lightning channels that are visible and seeing that move up and to the right over a long period of time, it is an indication of adoption of Bitcoin there on that payments use case, and an entrenchment of the financial infrastructure being built around it and on the base layer. And then finally, price dictates all. And I don't necessarily mean that at any given point in time that the adoption of Bitcoin is now, 20% less than it was 48 hours ago because the price is now 20% lower than it was 48 hours ago. But looking out over a long period of time, maybe using the 200-day moving or 200-week moving average, that has a steady march higher over a long period of time. And that, in my mind, is a very strong signal of ongoing adoption, because the only way that Bitcoin, the only reactionary function for Bitcoin's price over the long term is to go up as more people are coming in, or go down if demand for the system is falling over a long period of time. Because of that fixed supply, it is baked into the cake that if adoption continues, if the network continues to grow, that the price must go higher. And then, maybe you got to back out how much of that is being juiced up by the debasement of fiat currencies and the capital that's flowing in from there. But if you were able to control for that, which is very difficult to do, but if you were able to control for that, you still would have most of the price movement coming from the demand side of new entrants coming into the space and bidding the price of UTXOs, the price of sats, much higher.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I think what you mentioned about the hash rate and the energy infrastructure is quite fascinating. Because as I mentioned, this taxonomy of Bitcoin adoption, this research that I interviewed about recently, it sort of looks at that where you might have a community that's benefiting from more stable power spot pricing or more stable electricity generally. They're not using Bitcoin or anything like that, but because their generator has some load balancing and demand response in place, they're kind of benefiting, and in a sense they're adopting Bitcoin. And it's a lot less binary than, do you hodl or do you not hodl?
They're enjoying the benefits that the system is providing to the world, whether they are hodling it or not. And then the question becomes, okay, well, if somebody had a great idea of extracting that Bitcoin mining out of the process once it's already been built there, well, what's the impact going to be to that consumer, to that region, to that city? If it's at all inconvenient, people are going to say, well, what the hell are you doing? Why would you take out this thing that's working, And so people will fight for the things to continue to work the way that they are enjoying them.
And in terms of your role at Unchained, Trey, is there anything you're working on or excited for the future?
Yeah. One of the big initiatives that we have launched, which is tied to a new feature within the Unchained platform, is what we call connections. And there's this early stage adopter of Bitcoin, which is you and me and, our friends who are very much convicted with Bitcoin. And then there's the friends of friends and family members who they've seen this thing go up relentlessly and maybe they bought a little bit and it's sitting on Coinbase. Maybe they bought a lot and it's sitting on Coinbase and they haven't really given custody a thought. But you as the Bitcoin guy can be helpful to them in allowing them to improve their custody position, helping them to withdraw Bitcoin off of the exchange and hold it in a collaborative custody vault without requiring them to take on the full responsibility of multi-sig and collaborative custody and be in a position where, they could make some mistakes and potentially lose the Bitcoin. You're there right alongside them to do so. And so what we've enabled is for you as a client of Unchained and let's say a brother or a cousin to have their own account, they have their own vault, and you can be a key agent for them. You can lend your key to them as part of that quorum. And we just make it very easy for you to build these quorums across your own network. And we really have this vision of a network of keys that is providing this extremely strong substrate of Bitcoin holders that are all networked together using multi-sig and using this collaborative custody model to improve the custody foundation of the network overall. It's really beneficial to Bitcoin if you've got all of these people working together, none of them being able to move Bitcoin on their own. They must work together in order to get access to it. And then you've got this like web of trust type of situation with your close family and friends helping each other do this. I think the Fedi team and the Fedi project has a similar vision, is saying, there are these trusted community leaders and they're going to be running the fediments and the federations that are enabling this eCash. It's kind of a similar concept to that, right? Where you are building this web of trust with your family and friends and really enabling people to set up an easy way to secure their Bitcoin, not trusting the exchange. And then that also lends itself pretty well to succession planning, which is one of the things that we focus a lot on at Unchained, is helping our clients get into a position where they can't just make one mistake and lose the Bitcoin, and that they've got a plan for passing it on to their family members. These are the two main problems that everybody I talk to comes to me with, right? How do I not lose it? How do I pass it down to my family?
Yeah.
That's like the core of the problem that we help our clients to solve. And then we build these other financial tools around that such that you can really make that bridge between Bitcoin and the dollar much wider and easier to go across.
Yeah. And I'm curious with the Unchained platform and the services you offer, is that something that is globally available, or are you limited to certain jurisdictions and that where people can sign up to your services?
Yeah, we are globally available, and vaults are the product that we offer that is available around the world.
I
We
see.
do have other financial services like the ability to buy and sell. We have a trading desk there. We have commercial Bitcoin-backed loans as well. And then we have retirement accounts in the form of an IRA. All of those are available only in the US, in the states that we support. The IRA is supported across the US. And then almost all states on the trading side and almost all states on the lending side. Um, we've made an intentional decision to focus our capital where we think can have the greatest impact and where we know the market the best and all that. But we do have a considerable portion of our client base that are outside of the US. They're kind of concentrated in the UK and Canada and Australia. And but they, are great clients who have really contributed a lot to the feedback that we've gotten and all of that and helping us to build the product. So it's definitely not something that we're like completely ignoring, but just making an intentional, having intentionality in the way that we go to market, as we were talking about with the fire movement there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's awesome. And this connections product sounds really interesting. I think the web of trust is sort of a key word for me in a lot of things I do. And I think as we move into this brave new world, having something like that, having someone who can help be part of a trusted family member or a friend who can sort of be part of making sure you're comfortable with being in often exchange and being in control, because that is a big leap of faith for a lot of people. They don't maybe trust themselves enough to hold their own keys potentially.
Yeah, it provides a little bit more of a gradual step toward full sovereignty and holding Bitcoin for people who are maybe not quite there yet, right?
Yeah.
Whereas they otherwise would just keep it on the exchange. You can help them take that one step. They can learn how to use a hardware device. You can be there right there with them to help them understand what's happening. And if they decide to leave it out and the dog eats the seed phrase, it's not a big deal because you've got that backup key there, and the importance of making sure that it's there to be able to recover access to the Bitcoin. And then over time, when they're ready, they can very easily just rekey their vault, get you out of their quorum, and take full control over it, right? Or change that for another institutional key agent, maybe, as this network continues to grow.
Yeah, and if people want to look into Unchained, where can they go?
Unchained.com. You can book a consultation. They're free, and we'll spend 20 minutes or half an hour talking about your goals. Almost 100% of the time, you're going to tell me that your goal is to not lose your Bitcoin and to make sure you got a succession plan in place. So we'll start there. But we help individuals and businesses across the world. We work with a lot of mining companies. Probably our client base skews toward high net worth individuals and family offices and investment funds. Really anybody who are like whole coiners and more, people who have a material amount of wealth in Bitcoin that really demands a higher level of security and resiliency and fault tolerance built into it. And that understand the importance of making sure that you're holding those keys yourself and not trusting somebody else with it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Thank you, Trey. And I guess the final piece maybe we can close on is in terms of any books or media or other projects that broadly in the Bitcoin space or more generally have caught your eye that you're interested in lately.
Oh, I wish I could say that I wish I had a good answer to this. And let me explain.
It's okay.
I very tangentially pay attention to all of the content that's out there, and there's a deluge of it every single day. And luckily, I don't have a lot of time to like really dig into anything right now. That's a good thing. That means that I'm very busy, that Unchained is very busy. I'm talking to people and helping them secure their Bitcoin. I don't really have a whole lot of time for digging into the Bitcoin content that's out there. I know that's not a very satisfying answer to your question. One thing that I am reading right now, though, is outside of the Bitcoin world, is Atomic Habits. And it kind of fits into, I know a lot of people really love this book, and I've really enjoyed it so far. I'm about halfway through. It kind of fits into that FIRE framework to some degree, right? There's a lot of synergy there in essentially setting up that that automatic reaction function for being intentional about how you want to shape your life and your finances and all of that. So I'm trying to rewire my brain on a daily basis to be a little bit more effective and in helping Bitcoin adoption that way. So I'll leave you with that one. And then the other thing to just bring a little bit of light to, I'm a golfer. We had we Unchained sponsored the 18th hole of the Bitcoin Golf Championship. When was that? 2 weeks ago, I guess you could say now, in Nashville, which was a great event, and sounds like the first of many. And myself, Joe Burnett, Rocky Wold, all here at Unchained, we wrote an article talking about the synergies between golf and Bitcoin as it relates to proof of work, as it relates to low time preference, and really approaching the game of golf with this intentionality and depth and kind of the maddeningness of the game. It's simple but complex at the same time, like all this stuff. You should definitely go check that out. It was posted on the Bitcoin Magazine website as part of their opinion pieces or color pieces there. And I think there's going to be a lot more to come with the golf theme and Bitcoin. There's a lot of Bitcoiners who play golf, and I personally want to incorporate that into my day-to-day as much as possible. So I'm being very intentional in making sure that we move the ball in that direction.
Yeah, that sounds awesome, man. We've got some great golf courses out in New Zealand as well, if you ever do get the chance. So have you ever been to New Zealand before?
I haven't, no. I would love to. Australia and New Zealand, both on my bucket list. We've talked about Thailand and Asia and all of that, and doing a similar type of trip as what we were talking about with Croatia, and the time zone difference is quite a bit different there. So it would kind of restrict my working ability. Yeah. But we'll get there. Yeah. See how this bull run treats us.
Yeah, and we might be able to host you over in New Zealand and go for a round of 18, because we got some great courses.
Let's do that over the winter sometime. Yeah. Winter here, summer for you all.
Yeah. But hey Trey, if people want to follow your writing and what you're putting out there, where can they find you online, man?
Yeah, you mentioned my personal website. It's treysellers.com. I'm on Twitter or X at @TS_HODL, HODL. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. Just search for my name, Trey Sellers. And then, of course, go check out unchained.com. And make sure that you are being intentional about the security of the Bitcoin, that you've got a plan in place for succession. Now is the time when, our phone, the proverbial phone, rings off the hook when this type of volatility hits the market, because people start, they start getting to the edge of their seat about, that thing that I've been putting off for a while. Yeah. It's time to act now. So don't hold off anymore. It's time. Take the control of your Bitcoin security very seriously. You want to make sure that you can hold on to this asset for the long term. Otherwise, it's not going to do you any good.
Yeah, get it off exchanges, people. Hey, Trey, all right, thank you very much for your time. Much appreciated.
Absolutely. Cool. Really enjoyed it, Cody. Thanks.
Thank you for listening. I do hope you enjoyed the show. I am Cody Ellingham, and that was the Transformation of Value podcast. If you would like to get in touch, please send me an email at hello@thetransformationofvalue.com, and I will get back to you.